The Treehouse and the Stubborn Squirrel. Frank and Tom had always been best friends. They spent every free moment together, inventing all sorts of games. One day, when the spring sun was shining brightly, the boys decided it was time for a new adventure. "Let's build a treehouse," Frank exclaimed, and Tom immediately agreed. Both of them loved climbing trees, and the idea of having their own secret treehouse was incredibly exciting. The beginning of the build wasn't easy. First, they had to find the right tree. Frank and Tom knew many trees around, but only one particularly caught their attention. It was huge, with thick branches on which they could build a platform. It also had dense leaves, providing shade and hiding the house from curious eyes. It was a tree growing right next to a small forest. "This is the perfect spot," Tom said, climbing onto one of the branches. "Right, let's do it," Frank replied, setting a toolbox next to him. They had a hammer, nails, and some old boards they found in the garage. They used them to build the platform where the treehouse would stand. The work went slowly, because the boys weren't yet experts in these kinds of tasks, but they gave it their all. Finally, after several hours, they managed to create a solid base. Next, they built the walls and roof with the boards, arranging them so that the house would be safe and cozy. Frank had a great idea to make small windows through which they could look at the world around. Tom, on the other hand, took care of the exit. He made a ladder from thicker branches and tied it to the tree. The treehouse was ready. The boys looked proudly at their work. The house was small, but big enough for both of them to fit inside. They placed a few old pillows they had taken from home inside, and they had a perfect base. "Now we have the best place to play," Frank said, and Tom nodded, proud of the fantastic idea they had and the hard work they had done. But as soon as they entered, something strange happened. A nimble red squirrel slid down from the tree. She stood right next to them on a branch and looked at them with a fierce gaze. "Hi," Frank said with a smile, but the squirrel didn't answer. After a moment, however, she opened her mouth and started to speak. "Hey, what are you doing here? This is my tree," the squirrel said, eyeing the boys impatiently. Frank and Tom looked at each other, surprised. They had never met a talking squirrel before. "This is your tree?" Tom asked, not hiding his surprise. "But it's just a tree. We built a house here." "It's been my tree forever. Build your houses somewhere else," the squirrel retorted, twisting her tail in a way that suggested she was very upset. The boys tried to explain, but the squirrel interrupted them. "This is my home, and my rules. Get out of here," she said firmly. "I'll show you that you shouldn't trespass on someone else's territory." Frank and Tom didn't know what to do. It seemed that the squirrel was very angry. Frank tried to explain to her that they didn't want to kick her off the tree, but that this spot was really perfect for a treehouse. However, the squirrel was unyielding. "I don't want any intruders here. It's time to throw you out," she said, and then began doing something strange. She grabbed some branches that were lying nearby and started throwing them at the house. One of the branches hit the window, and another one hit the ladder, which began to wobble. The boys quickly had to hold it to stop it from falling. "What are you doing? This is our treehouse," Tom yelled, trying to fix the ladder. "Stop messing around on my tree. It's my home, not yours," the squirrel replied, throwing another branch. This time, it hit the roof of the house, and several boards started sliding off. Frank and Tom rushed to act. They had to fix everything quickly before the house fell apart. "We can't give up," Frank said, looking at Tom, who was trying to keep the roof in place. "You're right. We need to solve this somehow," Tom replied, trying to fix the ladder again. "Stop!" the squirrel shouted, seeing their efforts. Why can't you just understand that I don't want you here?" The boys looked at each other and realized that they had to find a way to convince the squirrel that their house didn't threaten her territory. Maybe we could share this tree?" Frank asked. "We don't have to kick each other out. You have your place on this tree, and we have ours. Agreed?" The squirrel stared at them for a moment. She seemed a little surprised by their suggestion. She hesitated and then said, What if this doesn't work?" Frank and Tom smiled. Eventually, the squirrel stopped throwing branches and began to think. The boys decided to show her that they could be good neighbors. They promised that they wouldn't disturb her while gathering nuts, and that if she needed help with anything, they'd be there. "We'll help you find the best nuts in the area," Tom offered. "And I can make you the most comfortable branch you've ever seen," Frank added. "We'll all be here together, and the tree will become even more beautiful." The squirrel was silent for a moment. Then she smiled, though her face still had a hint of pride. "All right, but remember, I rule this tree," she said with a smile, then jumped to the lowest branch where she could watch the boys. Frank and Tom looked at each other and, amused, began rebuilding the treehouse. Eventually, they managed to reach an agreement with the squirrel, and their friendship began with taking care of this wonderful tree together. The boys thanked the squirrel for her understanding. The new rules seemed quite fair. Everyone had their own place on the tree, and no one got in the way of anyone else. Frank and Tom went back to their house, which now looked more stable, and the squirrel, though still a little suspicious, was definitely calmer. As the days went by, the boys spent more and more time in their treehouse. The squirrel watched them from the branches, but didn't bother them. Instead, over time, she started sharing her squirrel secrets with them. She told them about the best places in the forest to find the tastiest nuts and showed them how to climb trees in a way that allowed them to avoid dangerous branches. "You know, if you want to find the really best nuts, you need to look for the ones that grow on old oaks," the squirrel said one day, glancing at the boys who were building something new in their treehouse. "They have the most flavor, but you have to be careful because some of them grow really high." Frank and Tom were delighted. For several days, they walked with her through the forest, looking for the nuts she mentioned. The squirrel, despite her initial reluctance, began to trust them more and more. The boys decided to organize a little feast, where they shared all the delicious nuts. The squirrel was very happy that the boys didn't treat her as an obstacle, but as an ally. However, soon, even though everything seemed to be going very well, a new problem arose. One day, while playing, Frank and Tom noticed someone approaching their tree. It was an older boy from the neighborhood, someone they had never seen before. His name was Adam, and he looked at them with curiosity. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he asked, approaching them. "You built a house in this tree?" "But this is my tree." Frank and Tom looked at each other in surprise. "What do you mean yours?" Frank asked. Adam laughed. "I always come here. This tree has been here for years, and I know it. Actually, I wanted to build my own house here, but I see someone beat me to it. Well, maybe we can work something out." The boys felt that the situation was getting complicated. "This is our base. We built a house in this tree," Tom said. "And you know, we thought this was our spot because we didn't know anyone else was interested in it." "This isn't your spot," Adam responded. "This tree is on my land. Besides, I spent my whole childhood here, and I really don't like that someone put their house here." Frank and Tom were a little confused. "But we didn't want to bother anyone," Frank said. "We thought the tree was shared." "It's not shared," Adam replied. "Actually, I should be telling you to get down. This is my tree." At that moment, The squirrel, who had been listening to the entire conversation, quickly jumped down from the branches and stood next to the boys. "Adam, I know you," the squirrel said, looking at the boy with superiority. "This tree belongs to me, not you, and you won't decide who gets to use it." Adam looked at her in shock. "What did you say? A talking squirrel? That's impossible." "It's not impossible. It's true," the squirrel replied, proudly raising her tail. "And if you want to work something out with us, you have to remember that this tree is ours." And here, she looked at Frank and Tom with a confident gaze. Adam was a little stunned, but after a moment, he calmed down. All right. I didn't mean to offend anyone. If this is really your tree, maybe we can work something out. I wanted to build a house here, but now I see I have no right to interfere." The boys felt relieved. "Agreed. Maybe you could build a house in another tree?" Tom suggested. "Yeah, that could be a good solution," Frank added. "But you need to check if that tree is really free before you start building." Adam nodded. "You're right. I'll build my base somewhere else, and I promise I won't bother you anymore." He looked at the squirrel. "Thanks for explaining." After these words, Adam left, and the boys and the squirrel returned to their treehouse. The boys started laughing because the whole situation was a bit absurd, but they were happy they had come to an agreement. "Just think, Tom, we could have had 2 neighbors in this tree," Frank said, laughing. "Maybe Adam will build his house on the next tree." "Yes, and it will be great. We just need to remember that everyone has their place. The squirrel has hers, we have ours, and Adam can find another tree," Tom replied. And so, after all of that, life in the tree became peaceful again. Frank and Tom knew that sometimes problems could be solved through conversation and understanding, not arguments and misunderstandings. The squirrel taught them how important it was to respect someone else's territory, and how important friendship and cooperation were. From that day, the tree became a place where the boys, the squirrel, and maybe even Adam, once he found his place, could spend time together, laughing, talking, and discovering the secrets of the forest. Weeks passed, and life in the forest followed its peaceful rhythm. Frank and Tom spent more and more time in their treehouse, enjoying every moment. They began coming up with various improvements for their project. They built a small platform to sit on, hung a hammock from the tree, and placed some hooks inside for clothes. Their house had become a true base where they could hide from the world, talk about everything, and have fun. The squirrel visited them every day. She started to feel really comfortable, seeing that the boys treated the tree with respect. With each day, they became closer friends. Frank and Tom learned from the squirrel how to recognize the best places to play in the forest, and in return, they showed her the different games they played. They often walked together in the forest, picking berries, and sometimes helped the squirrel look for new nut spots. One day, as the boys were sitting in their treehouse, they heard footsteps. With a strange feeling, they looked at each other, because there weren't many people in the forest. When they looked out the window, they saw Adam approaching the tree, holding some wood and string. It seemed like he had something planned. "Hey, Adam!" Tom called out, leaning out the window. Adam smiled widely and waved. "Hey, guys! I've got something cool for you." "What's that?" Frank asked, looking at the wood and string Adam had brought. "I found some wood that might be useful for your treehouse, and I've got a few branches that would be great for a swing. I thought we could build something together," Adam answered, setting everything down on the ground and looking at the boys with a smile. "That's a great idea," Frank said, happily jumping down from the ladder. "Let's build a swing. This is going to be amazing." Tom and Frank, along with Adam, started building the swing. With the help of the squirrel, who ran around the branches and gave tips on how to best attach the strings, they managed to create a really solid structure. After a few hours of work, the swing was ready. The three of them, and later also the squirrel, took turns testing it, laughing and enjoying the new idea. "This is now our favorite way to have fun," Tom said, sitting on the swing while the squirrel laughed nearby. "Definitely," Frank added, looking at Adam. "Thanks for helping. Now our tree is even more perfect." "No problem," Adam replied, looking at his new friends. "I'm glad I could help. I think now we're really great neighbors." In the next few days, the boys, Adam and the squirrel, spent a lot of time together in the forest. Sometimes they built new things. Other times they just wandered, talking about everything. Each of them had their favorite spots. But now, thanks to their joint efforts, everyone felt like part of the same forest community. The children finally understood that territories could be shared, and different interests could complement each other. One day, the squirrel came to the boys with good news. "Guys, I've got something for you," she called, hopping in place. "I found the best nuts in the entire forest, on the highest branch of this tree." "Wow," Tom said, looking at her with admiration. "And what, are you going to share them with us?" "Of course," the squirrel replied, smiling widely. "Now's the time for a big feast." They organized a joint party. The squirrel prepared her best nuts, and the boys brought food from home. Adam also brought his favorite snacks. The whole group sat around a large stone near the tree and spent a nice time talking and laughing. "You know, it's really great that we all got along," Frank said, looking at his friends. "Yeah, it's true," Tom added. "I always thought a tree could be for one person only, but now I know we can have our own place and still share it with others." The squirrel nodded in agreement. "That's true. The tree is for all of us, as long as we respect each other. When we're friends, everything becomes easier." And so, that day, sitting together under the tree, Frank, Tom, Adam, and the squirrel knew that true friendship is based on respect and cooperation. They also knew that what they had built was something special. And it wasn't just the treehouse, but a team that formed as a result of joint efforts, care, and mutual understanding. Everything became easier when they realized there is a place for everyone in the world, and sharing can lead to great, wonderful things. The forest where they lived became not only their home, but also a space where they could all feel happy and safe together. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for new fairy tales every day.